right, everybody. So we are going to get started today for our course on autobiography and memoir. I don't know about you guys, but typically I get a lot of questions. What's the difference? It's so subtle. Is it really a big difference? So we're going to talk about that today. I am Kelly Lawlor, and I'm an English teacher. I am certified in Massachusetts to teach 5th grade through 12th grade. And I've taught 7th grade through 12th grade in my 17 years of teaching. I still have my ID card on because I was in the building today. They moved my classroom. Oh, no. So you got to believe this classroom hadn't been dusted in 20 years. And I just cannot, with my allergies, deal with the whole year without that kind of a classroom. So I was on top. The floors are great. They did that part, but they don't do all the extra surfaces. And so I was on top of the cabinets today, just making sure that we were ready for the school year.
Yeah. What grade are you doing this year?
I teach 7th grade.
Oh, 7th grade this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we are going to get started, and we're going to talk about autobiography and memoir just to get started. So everybody should have a packet right in front of you. If you like to take notes, I'm a huge note taker. My students, not so much. So we'll see how you're doing today. But I really appreciate, I think, all of you for coming and filling up the room for our class today. So this is kind of like a note sheet. It's my slide, and anything that I say and add on to the slide, you can write down, or anything that you say and add on and contribute to our class discussion, you can write down. So we're going to start with that. And okay, here we go. So our learning objectives. Every course kind of needs a roadmap for what we're working on, and so these are our objectives. So we want to kind of figure out what is the difference between an autobiography and a memoir. I brought just a few books that are considered memoirs versus an autobiography. Obviously, when we're talking about writing, the more that we read from authors and see really great examples of a memoir, then it helps us kind of inspire us to write our own good memoir. So if anybody, some of these are a little bit more tragic. Tragedy always sells books, doesn't it? Yeah. Right? So here is First They Killed My Father. And this is from a 5-year-old's perspective about what happened during the Cambodian genocide. And so it starts right away from that 5-year-old's perspective. You have an unreliable narrator, but it also makes it that much more powerful when you think about a child going through something that's like so emotional and turbulent. This is from an adult perspective, and if anybody's ever read this book, When Breath Becomes Air. I got through this very quickly just this summer. It's just 225 pages, and this is from a doctor's perspective. He was a neurosurgeon, and he had to commit so much time and study, internships, practice to be a neurosurgeon, and then he was diagnosed with an untreatable form of cancer. And so he talks about that, being the doctor and then having to put himself into those patients' shoes. So this is really powerful too. So I'd like for us to share what are our favorite stories. I'd like for us to do some hands-on activities later on where we talk about stories in our lives that could turn into a memoir. I myself have not written my memoir yet, but I will share my stories with you as well. And then we want to list some reasons why people write and identify, just some typical conventions, roadmaps, templates that you can follow to write your own narrative. Went backwards. Now we got it. Okay, so defining the autobiography or the memoir. So these are some questions. Maybe we could have a quick discussion. We're all sitting next to a partner. What is an autobiography? What do you think the difference is between a memoir? And what are some reasons why people might write one versus the other? There's no right answers in my class, okay? I just want to say that right away. That's why I don't teach math. I teach English because there are no right answers, and we all get to have our own perspective, okay? And so let's just take 5 minutes to share with your partner and try to answer this question about the difference between autobiography and memoir. All right, everybody, let's get back together here. I heard a lot of great answers, many great answers out there. And like I said, there's no right answer, so we're just kind of guessing right now. But normally when you get people together and you guess together, I find that most of the times we come to a pretty good answer. So we can kind of talk about, there's two different examples here. So basically, memoir is on the left-hand side. This is what memoir is. And so on the other side, we're basically going to say what it's not, which is going to be what autobiography is. Okay, so basically you have a memoir side. This is what we're saying it is. And an autobiography side. This is what we're saying it is. Okay? So now we're going to go over some possible answers. Does anybody want to share? Because I do not need to take up the whole class. I do not have to take up the whole class. There's plenty of air in this room for everybody. Would anyone like to share what you came up with as an answer? Yes.
So I think that a memoir has more passion in it, has more emotion in it, and has more personal parts of it.
Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
Both of these books that I talked about at the very beginning were super personal, right? Anyone want to say another thing about what memoir is or what it is not?
I think a memoir is just something that you want people to know. You don't put in all the bad stuff, you know.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay.
Or maybe it is good.
Yeah.
We kind of came up with a memoir is more memory oriented and subjective to what the person can remember, where an autobiography might be more factual and more, say, timeliney.
Yes. I agree with all of you, okay? So, yeah, you all got the right answer, okay? Claps or, pats on the back, whatever works for you. So, yeah, an autobiography, and I like how you talked about root words, memoir, memory. We're going to come back to that. But, yeah, the autobiography, when we get down to the Greek words of it, is a style of writing that has a long history. And the word autobiography is derived from self, life, and write. So obviously you are writing about your life in a more factual way. And it definitely, if you guys have read those biographies, it goes from the beginning to the end most of the time, right? Versus memoirs, which is focused on like one certain memory, one certain time that someone wants to share.
Does it have to be just one?
No, it doesn't. No. And memoir is, if you have heard any authors speak or like a memoirist, they don't want to be limited, So this is why it's hard to be the teacher and teach the notes and put one into one box and one into the other box, right? Because it's art, it's a craft. So autobiography, tells the life and their experiences, but it's probably more selective. It's just what they do want to share, what they're comfortable sharing. And I think I've read memoirs, which to me feel a lot more personal. All right, so here's a little bit of key differences if you want to fill in your worksheet. An autobiography is that factual retelling, Shirley used that word, factual, of a person's life experiences. And then it usually, like we said, it follows this chronology, and it goes in order. And normally we talk about our birth, our upbringing, our education, right? And get into, if we have a single life, a married life, so on and so forth, right? Versus the memoirs, which are a little less formal in style. You can kind of be a little bit more artistic. And it's more emotional sometimes. It's more about your feelings when those things happen to you, right? It's more descriptive. And we can talk about like the sensory details that people can add in their narratives. Okay, and then again, you said all these things. Memories, right? So this is kind of how we're going to differentiate between an autobiography and a memoir. But obviously, you're the author, the writing utensil is in your hands, so you can also make it whatever you want to make it. Okay? Any
You can have a combination.
You can have a combination, I would think. Yeah. And then this is the tough one. So are they real? So while many of these stories are going to draw on real life, on real events, obviously when you're telling your own story, you have a bias, right? No matter who I'm talking to or what I'm talking about, I have a bias that I'm not even thinking about, that I'm not even aware of. It's kind of that unconscious bias. But then obviously when I'm telling you a story about a fight I got into with my husband the other day, I'm going to be biased towards my side because I'm always right in my house. So that is what makes it really difficult. We know, I teach about, when I taught high school, I taught about the Cambodian genocide. I taught about the experiences that people were faced with when they dealt with the Khmer Rouge and the ruling party at the time. So there's a lot in this book that happened, but it just gets to be, it's a question you can't always ask. Did this really happen to you? Because from that 5-year-old's perspective, the answer is yes, right? Wrote about it, remembered it, and this is the way that she wrote about it, and this is the way that she remembered it. So that's just kind of what we get into when we start talking about literature.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you were writing about an incident and persons in your lives who really should not be named, you put it in a memoir? Because if it's an autobiography, you pretty much have to.
Factual. Yeah. I think that's why some people go away from memoir. I don't think as many authors write memoirs, right? So a lot of times I see people going more into fiction because they want to say that this was loosely based, but they can fictionalize a lot of the pieces because they don't want to deal with the legal aspects, with the copyright aspects, with the getting permission from people in their lives that this is the way that I remember it, right? So that's why sometimes memoirs, authors won't go in that direction and they'll just go with fiction if it's too difficult and complicated from what I've read and understood.
That's all I want to
Yeah, exactly. So you can definitely go the memoir route, but you are going to have to deal with any backlash, right? If people say that you wrote something that was possibly, libel, right? Yeah.
But if you don't put the name.
If you don't put the name, if you change it, if you say that this is mostly fiction, that's how most of the other authors get around it. Yeah. Great question. So stories are compelling. We want to write compelling stories. We want it to be interesting. We want to figure out what draws readers into a narrative. So we're going to talk a lot about psychology, right? And I'm not a psychologist, but I work with students. I have my own children, and I have to learn a thing or two about how their brains are working. And I'm sure we've all learned a little bit about human development in our lives. So if you can get to the psychology of your characters, you can really write an interesting story that pulls in any reader. All right, so just some purposes of why someone might write an autobiography versus a memoir. Obviously to share their experiences, to entertain, to get your life and your experience. And this is where I wanted to kind of talk about legacy in this class today. Share that legacy with other people, to a larger audience, define it for yourself and for others. And then possibly to change people's attitudes or present different perspectives on a subject. So I don't know, do you guys have any great autobiographies that you've enjoyed over the years? My husband really liked the Tiger Woods autobiography and the Arnold Schwarzenegger autobiography. But do you have any other ones that you've liked, Shirley?
Goodwin has written a number of things. One is, I think of as a memoir, is when she was a kid, and it's called Wait Till Next Year. It's about the story of her relationship with her father and the baseball teams in New York City. and how her love of baseball evolved.
Yeah.
And so it's very personal, and it really doesn't have a purpose except to sort of entertain and share those emotions and
That love for the sport.
and she's written other stuff, just most recently about she and her husband, and recent, kind of timeline of their relationship. And I don't know whether that's a memoir. I think it's more memoir, but
Yeah. Well, this is the difficult question that which box are you going to put it into? And does it ultimately matter? Yeah.
That makes me think of William Lee's Heat Moon, his Blue Highways. So he is on this trip, and he's going around and meeting all these people in rural America. And he gets their stories. And so he's telling the biographies of these people, but it's really his story too about how he relates to all these people that are these unusual characters all in these rural areas that nobody ever goes to.
Yeah.
In this country.
Yeah. That's powerful, and then connects it back to his own life.
what's that
Yeah.
called?
Blue Highways.
Blue Highway.
Okay.
It beat Stud Sturgill by 100.
Okay. All right, write it down. We can definitely make a side list of recommendations here. That's what this class is for too. And I like I said, some of the ones I've already talked about too. So if we were to analyze autobiography, aspects of autobiography that are subjective versus objective, right? Like even an biographer could go in a more subjective or more objective direction. So that could define if they're more factual or if they're more emotional in their autobiography. So the writer gets to choose what they're going to write about. When you're studying autobiography and memoir, we analyze how the writer uses the storytelling conventions. So we are going to talk about what are typical narrative shapes for this type of writing, and I can give you some frameworks. But when I give you a framework, again, it's flexibility, right? Just like when I'm teaching grammar, okay, you can follow the rules, but sometimes we like to follow our own rules too. So again, it's not going to be super formulaic that you have to follow, but if it inspires you and it gets you started, use it. And so we'll talk about some different prompts that we can use. I always like to write lists when I'm getting started. What are my ideas? Dump it on paper. And then, on tomorrow when I wake up and I have some time to myself, which doesn't happen a lot, then I can see which idea inspires me today, and then I can just start writing. So really the best thing you can do is make time to write, and make it a pattern. Try to be as consistent as possible, because really, don't worry about editing at the beginning. All we really want to do is write at the beginning, and that's what I'm kind of talking about today. So some conventions would be characterization, right? If you have an interesting character, that is how you're going to hook your reader and how you're going to bring the story to life. And so these are just typical characterization rules that you might want to follow, is to construct your character, and you want to have, think about the things that not everybody thinks about. When you open up one of these books and you just describe a character, you need to put that person, an image needs to come to the mind of your reader. So what do they look like? What do they sound like? Are they a quick talker like I am? Is it hard to follow them? Or are they slow, methodic? Do they take their time, So these are details that if you want to be a writer, you have to add the details in. And sometimes it's those details that might get lost on like when you're in the moment. So actions, what do they do? How do they behave? How do they behave out in public versus how they behave at home, right? All of these different aspects of their life, you've got to get it on paper. And that's what's going to fill pages, right? Character descriptions, how they're acting, how they're talking to other people. You can incorporate dialogue. And then, you know, what I really like to get to is the psychology. What were they thinking to marry that person, or to take that job, or to move away from their family to a whole nother country? You know, what was behind their thinking? And that's the psychology of the characters. These are just broad topics, okay? So setting, right? Typically when you read any novel, any short story, it starts with what's it look like outside? Is it dewy? Or is there frost on the ground? Those darn farmers wanted to make it through, but that frost is preventing our apples from growing. You know, so you really want to describe as much as you can about the setting. And normally, your story starts with the setting. It starts with the characters. So these are just some kind of formulaic things to think about when you write your own memoir or autobiography. And, you know, this is where, you know, what are some things, this is why I like to read books that make me do more research. You know, usually authors are really good about doing their own research and trying to, if they're talking about a different time period, you know, they're going to try to put us in that time period. But you can get some of the objective facts of what's happening in the world, and that's kind of like the macro level. And then you dial down and you get to that micro level where it's more subjective, and you can really think about, well, what was that character going through? They couldn't handle that at that moment in their lives. You know what I mean? And so you can also get into that emotional language for setting. So there's a lot to think about when we get to the setting pieces. Any questions? Anyone want to stop me before we go?
The sort of details of what's going on in the world while the other story's happening makes it seem more authentic.
Yes.
Seem more real.
Yes.
Whenever I read like historical fiction and they're saying, well, yeah, that battle was over here, or this, you know, this tragedy just happened, then you get a sense of reality. Like this, oh, this is not just somebody's pie in the sky idea. This is real.
Yeah. Yeah. And no one wants to hear a story that's done in a minute, you know? You don't always want people to just get to the point. Well, sometimes you do, okay? We all know a jabbermouth or two that's just going to keep talking, and we do want them to get to the point. But the beauty is in the storytelling, and the beauty is peeling back the layers like an onion, right? Peel back the layers of the onion so that you can figure out the message. And that's what's beautiful about reading. Yeah, there's something the author meant, but there's something the reader takes away, and it's not going to be exactly the same, right? Perspective, okay, so this is where we talk about point of view. Pronouns, right, usually those memoirs are going to be written in that first person point of view, that first person's perspective, so we're going to use those pronouns, I, me, my. But we've all read, you know, more fictional stories that are in that third person perspective, and it's talking about what he or she or they were doing in that moment. Personal, so the more sources you have, right, that kind of gets us into the historical writing, but you know, if you have different sources, you can add them into your story too. There's a few characters' perspectives in here, even though we're hearing everything from Luong Ung, our writer, and eyewitness examples. You know, that's in some of these too. And in this book, there's a foreword from a friend who happens to be a famous doctor as well that people would know. And so his perspective is in here too, of what it was like seeing his friend go through this terrible time in his life. And I think he even wrote it, and what made it more real, I'm getting goosebumps saying it, is that his friend hadn't passed yet. He asked them to write the letter, but he knew that it was like ultimately going to end tragically. So that makes it more real. When it's in the moment, you get those emotions in the moment. Structure, I can give you another handout. I'm a handout queen, okay? But we'll talk about this later if you want more structure to think about. But sometimes it just works to have less structure for some people. So it really depends on how you are as a writer. I obviously have to ask my 7th graders to write outlines and to do drafts. And that works for a lot of people, to have a clear outline so you kind of know where the big pieces are going to go. But the beautiful part is when you're writing and when you create something that you didn't outline, that you didn't plan. I think there's a lot of beauty in that too. So this is really all about balance when we talk about structure. Do you want to know how everything is going, or do you want to have some creative license as well? And I think it's great when there's a disruption, right? It's not always fun to read about the orderly, calm things that happen in our lives, everything that goes right. It's more fun to read about everything that goes wrong and when someone just couldn't catch a break. And so when it's disruptive, or when there's those contrasts between this was the plan and this is where it headed, it's the contrast that really shows up and to be more interesting and entertaining for your reader. All right, and then these are just some language features that authors like to add. Obviously, lots of figurative language, comparisons. Do you have a metaphor? Are you making some kind of a paradox? Or just have a lot of similes, personification, imagery? I could talk about that all day long. And then, getting more into imagery, using the sensory language, making sure that when you're writing, you're thinking about what are people hearing, feeling, tasting, seeing. Were there vibrant colors under the ocean when they were at the coral reef, or were they in the desert and they started to have illusions because they just needed more water, they were dehydrated. How are you going to describe the things versus telling the things? You want to show it and not just tell it. And then, bringing in those emotions. Do you need to use formal language? Depends on what exactly you're writing about. There's a lot of jargon in this book because he's a neurosurgeon. And so you had to, kind of get into his world of what he did on a daily basis. And when his brain fog, he started not being able to work anymore, he had to get out of the hospital and go be a patient in the hospital. So the jargon versus the colloquial language is that everyday language, the stuff that we use to talk, every day. So maybe there's a slang word for that. The kids these days are talking about the vibe. Oh yeah. That's my vibe. That hat, girl. Or someone told me the other day that was so 2012. And so I'm starting to go over the hill. I'm not understanding the language either, but it's fun. So thinking about all the language, and then obviously tone and mood. Do you want to have a serious book? Do you want to get to the emotion? Is it tragic? Where are you going to go with that? And so when we talk about mood, is it going to be suspenseful? We're kind of getting more into that horror, Edgar Allan Poe type of writing. If you want it to be more of a suspense or mystery, so you got to think about that. And then details. What are you adding? What are you omitting? And if you're writing an autobiography or a memoir, can you omit, or do you just have to put it all out there? That's going to be an unanswered question right now. We'll come back to it later for our hands-on learning in just a minute. I think this is almost my last slide. Background information. So when you're back at setting up the characters and the setting, context is really important. If there is something going on in the world, if there's a specific time period, then you might need to think about tense, past, future tense. And think about all the different historical, cultural, social, political, economic contexts that you're telling your story in. All right, so now we are going to do some hands-on activities for us to start to think about ideas for our own autobiography or our own memoirs. And so thank you for attending my lecture.
Thank you.